Welcome back to One Piece Explained. Chapter 1140 brings us two new Holy Knights with some surprising backgrounds, a bunch of insight into how strong Scopper Gaban can be, and shed some more light on just what kind of person the late King Harald is, plus so much more, so let's get right into it. We continue on with our 26th entry in the Ogre Child Yamato's Golden Harvest Surrogate Pilgrimage cover story as we find Ulti tied to a huge dartboard with what we can assume to be Sea Prism Stone to prevent her from using her Zoan Fruit powers. This scene is a bit reminiscent of what we saw in the live action with Kabaji having tied up Zoro in a similar fashion. Of course, Who's Who seems to have been throwing entire swords here instead of just mere daggers, and in his hand is presumably Yasuo's blade that we saw with him in the last chapter, though a lot of these swords that we see are pretty similar with their guards and handles. Behind and below the dartboard are the rest of Who's Who's crew that we saw in the previous chapter, but a new addition is the wide cat mink that wasn't there previously. We had actually initially seen him during the Wano arc when we first got a look at some of Who's Who's underlings. Also present here is Page 1, who looks to be detained with Sea Prism Stone handcuffs as well, and we saw as far back as their introduction that Who's Who did not really care for the pair of siblings, thinking of them as nothing more than annoying brats, so I suppose it only makes sense that he would antagonize them after Kaido's crew formally disbanded. I suspect Yamato will come in to save the day, and perhaps even take Ulti and Page 1 under their wing, since all three of them are Kaido's children in one way or another, so maybe we'll start getting into the action here in the next chapter. But for now, let's talk about the rest of chapter 1140, Scopper Gaban. We pick back up where we left off, with Gaban challenging Luffy to a fight for the key to Loki's chains. While Luffy gladly accepts, Zoro recalls Colin mentioning how his father is capable enough to stand against the giant warriors of Elbaf, and we see this skill displayed throughout this chapter, as Gaban just seems to be too fast for Luffy's straightforward techniques. Not only that, but Gaban is shown to be a pretty serious fighter with his use of armament haki as he infuses the key and slams down on Luffy. This scene is very reminiscent of Kaido's Conqueror of Three Worlds Ragnarok technique, where he strikes down on his enemy with his Conqueror Haki-infused club. It should be noted that it's not explicitly clear what type of Haki Gaban is making use of here, and I know some fans like to point to the presence of Black Lightning as an indication of Conquerors being used, but we've seen throughout the series that it's also associated with armament. There may be something to distinguishing the two with the quality of lightning, as we've tended to see Conquerors presented with much thicker, stronger lightning before, but it's never been mentioned explicitly. Just comparing this to Kaido's technique, it would seem this is more likely to be armament haki at play. That isn't to say that Gaban won't have Conquerors, but rather this is just not indicative of it just yet. We may also be able to discern this as being armament based on the way the haki seems to be infused in the key in this one panel. This creeping flame-like pattern has only been seen in the series on a handful of occasions, most notably with Luffy in his Gear 4th form as he covers his body with armament. The only other characters that have exhibited this sort of flame pattern with their armament haki are Big Mom during her brief clash with Luffy in Gear 4th, and Katakuri as well. It's never been made clear if this pattern was supposed to be indicative of any special property, or if this is just a style choice that Oda had made during this era of the series, but it's definitely interesting to see it once again here with Gaban. Luffy continues his attempt at the key, as we see a Gum Gum Gatling like flurry of grabs, but Gaban continues to evade him, jumping around and dodging nonchalantly. This is something that we've seen Luffy do quite a bit, especially in the last few arcs, such as when he fought against Urashima in Wano, or even Saturn on Egghead. The climax of this fight comes when Gaban pulls out his signature twin axes, seemingly out of nowhere, and uses a technique called Yaso Takeru, as he launches a flurry of air pressure slashes toward Luffy. The name of this move seems to be a reference to a group of 80 military leaders that were defeated in Japanese history by the Emperor, likening the sheer number of adversaries in that incident to the onslaught of slashes that we see here. Zoro calls out to Luffy to avoid this attack, which reminded me a lot of Big Mom calling out to Kaido during the rooftop battle on Onigashima when Zoro was preparing for a similarly powerful technique. Now Zoro is able to intercept this, prompting Gaban to silently commend Luffy and his crew, but the breadth of the attack is so vast that it ends up destroying one of the towers of the castle and sending it crashing down into the underworld. It is quite interesting that Oda decides to linger on this scene for as long as he does, especially when you consider the fact that nobody has been allowed in the castle since Harald's death. Could this perhaps be setting up something where the people of Elbaf learn the truth behind what happened on that fateful day? Perhaps there's something in that part of the castle that could exonerate Loki, and this could be a bit wild, but maybe there's even someone that was kept in the castle this whole time, hidden from the rest of the giants. Loki's mother was said to have passed away, but perhaps they were just kept alive in secret, or even more tantalizing, could be Hyrule mother, who was not allowed to be queen because of her foreign heritage. What if she was kept in the castle in secret as well? Lots of fun possibilities here. Now Luffy comes back into the action in his Gear 5th form, and the axe that he bore on his back is in his hand. Just as we saw earlier in the arc in the Lego City, Luffy's appearance in Gear 5th seems to have maintained his Elbaf clothing, which is a bit of a departure from Wano and Egghead, where he would lose the clothing and revert to what we expected from his Gear 5th look. Not only that, but his hair seems to grow over his helmet, giving him horns as well. It's not entirely clear to me if this is just some style choice by Oda, or if there's something greater going on at play with his Devil Fruit abilities reacting to his presence on Elbaf and manifesting in accordance with that. We'll just have to see. Gaban takes note of this all-white form, almost as if he had been wanting to fight Luffy in order to confirm what he had heard, but we'll get into more of that in just a second. I should note that Luffy and Zoro appearing side by side here is strikingly similar to how Roger and Rayleigh were depicted during that scene from God Valley, with of course Scopper being on the other side. I'm sure this parallel between the four men is as blatant to Gaban as they are to us, and of note, we do get to see Gaban's eyes in this panel in full. While this is not the first time that we've seen them in the series, it is the first time we've seen them unobstructed as he had been depicted crying during the Oden flashback. Though I guess we haven't actually seen his left eye in the present day just yet, so I suppose there could be a twist here where he's missing one eye or something like that. Coincidentally, it is his right eye once again that is depicted with this ominous glint on the next page. As Luffy and Zoro charge at him, Gaban surrenders as he has got to see what he wanted from Luffy. The two young pirates are annoyed at Gaban's nonsense, which reminded me a lot of the crew's interaction with Crocus back during Reverse Mountain. While he didn't challenge the Straw Hats to a fight there, he did mess around with them, making it seem like a fight would result in a death, only to reveal that it was himself that he was talking about. Gaban collects his things and leaves the crew with some ominous instructions, telling them to find him before they leave, that is, if Elbaf is still around. He could just be saying this since he knows Luffy's intention is to free Loki, which would presumably bring about the destruction of Elbaf and the world, as we have been told. However, I wonder if there's more to it. For a little while now, we've been wondering if Gaban has some exceptional observation hockey skills, perhaps even to the point of being able to see further into the future than we have seen in the series so far. Maybe that's what the point of the panel on the previous page was, with the glint in Gaban's glasses, signifying him seeing the outcome of the battle with Luffy and Zoro, motivating him to give up ahead of time. Who knows, maybe he was even waiting for the Straw Hats to arrive on Elbaf a few days ahead of time because of this ability. In either case, this sequence of showing off a great feat of strength and immediately leaving just to reunite with the Straw Hats later in the arc does parallel what we got with Rayleigh, who had exhibited his Conqueror's Hockey in the auction house and went off ahead while the Straw Hats handled the Marines. The real reason Gaban was expecting the Straw Hats, though, may have been from a result of his meeting with Shanks, which we got a flashback to in this chapter. It seems Shanks had told Gaban about Luffy, much like he did to Rayleigh several years ago, as we learned during the Sabati Archipelago arc. While Rayleigh was eager and immediately receptive of Luffy's importance as described by Shanks, Gaban was a little more skeptical and needed to see for himself, which is why he challenged Luffy throughout this chapter, and is also probably why he kept taking shots at Shanks, just to see how Luffy would react. The combination of Shanks informing him about Luffy and the giant warrior pirates setting sail to Egghead the next day would offer a good explanation as to why and how Gaban was waiting at the shore in that earlier chapter. Of course, the crew ended up taking longer than expected because of the sleep-inducing mists around the island, and so Gaban left the shore and headed back to the Sun World, which is where he ended up meeting Luffy in the present day. Now, this brief flashback with Shanks could also work to recontextualize a line that has been extremely curious since its introduction. During the Egghead arc, we found Shanks drinking at the tavern at the coast of Elbaf, as he mentioned that he had spent too much time on the island catching up amongst old friends who thought each other dead. At the time, we weren't supposed to think too much of it and just assumed that it was in reference to Dory and Brogy, who were reintroduced into the story in that same chapter. But the more you think about it, the less it makes sense for Shanks to think both Dory and Brogy were dead, and for Dory and Brogy to assume Shanks to have died. It could be that this was actually in reference to Oimo and Kashi reuniting with Dory and Brogy, but the same logic applies here, since Dory and Brogy would have no reason to believe that their subordinates died, and Oimo and Kashi were told their captains were still alive by Usopp. When Loki was introduced, it seemed plausible that this was actually in reference to him, since he was sentenced to death by crucifixion after Shanks captured him, which would be reason for Shanks to think Loki was dead, and Loki may have just been wishing death upon Shanks. But now I wonder if Gaban was who he was actually referring to. It's plausible that this is the first time Shanks had seen Gaban in over 20 years, so assuming him to be dead was reasonable, though I guess Gaban wouldn't have had much reason to believe Shanks to have died, but hey, who knows. That's about it for this half of the chapter. Now let's talk about the two new Holy Knights. Over at the Walrus School, it seems some of the children are all crazed over the sighting of a mysterious bird. They call out for the teacher as Angie responds alongside another giant who we have not seen before, presumably a fellow teacher at the school. Among the group of students is the one girl with the helmet with straps and the bandana around her neck that we saw earlier in the arc. While Ange seems to have missed it, we immediately see that this was actually Gunko's bird made out of arrows, as she and Shamrock land on a tree branch out of sight from the students. Recall that their plan was to apprehend the children of Elbaf, so there being a school where most of the children should be makes it almost too easy for them. Gunko spawns a summoning circle herself, much to my surprise, and we'll talk more about the mechanics of this pentagram, also referred to as the Abyss, in just a bit. With this, a large black bolt of lightning strikes and brings forth two figures in black flames. Gaban had mentioned in the previous chapter that he had sensed a strange presence in the castle, likely referring to when Shamrock and Gunko initially arrived, so it will be interesting to see if he also tuned into this summoning. Conveniently, neither of his family members would be at the school right now, as his son Colin was last seen partying at the Western Village and his wife Ripley was elsewhere, taking Frankie on a tour of the Jewel Tree Atom. The flames begin to materialize into the figures of the two holy knights, who appear to be in mid-conversation with someone else. One of them is shown with the transponder snail, but it's not entirely clear who could be on the other line, as it's surely not Gunko or Shamrock. My interpretation here is that Gunko had made contact with Mary Joie earlier when she was instructed by Shamrock and relayed to them that they needed another holy knight. From there, whoever she spoke to contacted the other holy knights and began providing the information. In fact, this could be Garling himself, since as far as we know, he may still be the supreme commander of the Holy Knights. In any case, with this, we get the introduction of two new incredible characters. First off, we have Saint Shepherd Sommers, a burly spectacled man who appears to be a bit older in age. Now clearly he was not yet ready to be summoned, having been mid-conversation when he was teleported, and as such, we see him here sitting in nothing but his underwear with his overcoat draped over. There's an excellent gag here with Gunko being too embarrassed to look at him in his undergarments, while she's effectively dressed the same way. When in his formal clothing, however, we see he sports a military-inspired suit, somewhat similar to Shamrock, though he certainly has a lot of medals and pins. His belt buckle features the hoof of the flying dragon, the symbol of the celestial dragons, that is also branded on their slaves, but it is adorned with wings on the side. Pinned on his chest is a rose, which may be indicative of his power set, in conjunction with a sword, which features thorns on the hilt. Now, the more interesting part of Sommers is his family name, Shepherd. You may recall that this is also the family that Saint Jupiter of the Five Elders belongs to, and you can definitely see some similarities in their features with their long faces and beards. Actually, there's more to it here, as Sommers' beard features a cross design that is also the kanji for 10 in Japanese, read as Ju. This is the same kanji found in Jupiter's name, and this is our first instance of seeing family members of any of the original Five Elders, and brings up an interesting question about just how exactly Sommers is related to Jupiter. Despite appearing older than Jupiter, he could realistically be his descendant, given that the Elders seemingly have not aged for centuries. We also have Saint Remo Shifu Killingham appearing here in what appears to be a hybrid Zoan form. Now, given his horn, his flowing mane, and giraffe or dragon-like appearance, along with his name, it appears to me that he has eaten a Kirin devil fruit. The Kirin, or Qilin, is a mythical creature found in Chinese mythology that often resembles a giraffe or dragon depending on the depiction. His name here is a play on this, as in the original Japanese, it would be pronounced Kiringamu. What's particularly interesting, however, is that he looks to be an awakened Zoan, as evidenced by the scarf of clouds or Hagoromo around his neck and arms, but not only that, his Hagoromo is actually white or light-colored. So far, Luffy is the only character to have been depicted with a white-colored Hagoromo in his awakened state, with all other Hagoromo in the series being black. The one exception, of course, is Yamato, who's depicted with the Hagoromo in their hybrid and beast forms, but it seems this is just part of their design and not a signifier of awakening, as Oda recently showed us what Yamato looked like as a child in both forms, and the Hagoromo was present back then as well. So unless Yamato had always been awakened, it seems this is just part of the fruit's appearance. Now, this does bring forth more questions about just how Devil Fruit Awakening works and what the color of the Hagoromo means. I suppose it could just be the case that the Kirin fruit features a Hagoromo as part of the base design, just like Yamato's fruit does, but I guess we'll have to see. Anyways, Killingham also sports a similar military-inspired outfit, and we can clearly see some sort of band around his left arm with a specific symbol. We saw a similar band on Sommers' arm, and we've seen there to be a band around Gunko's arm as well. Perhaps this could be the symbol of the Holy Knights. Killingham also wields some sort of trident as a weapon, with each blade oriented in a non-uniform fashion. We've seen many trident users throughout the series, but most of them are named characters that we already know. However, I did immediately think of this one broker that watched the demonstration on Punk Hazard, who also had a trident and wore a cape or overcoat. I doubt there's a connection there, but figured I'd include it for good measure, as you never know. Killingham is also shown to be wearing a bubble, as we saw with celestial dragons who did not want to breathe the same air as the commoners when they left the Holy Land, but he seems to be taking it a step further with a gas mask addition. Interestingly, back during the God Valley flashback, we did see silhouettes of several Holy Knights, and 2 of them appeared to be wearing bubbles as well. It's hard to tell just how old either of these new knights are, but certainly plausible that they were there alongside Garling 38 years ago. Now, while we have heard of the Shepherd family before, the Remo Shifu family is brand new and gives us another potential member of the original 20 families who created the world. So far, the Nerona, Don Quixote, and Nefeltari families have explicitly been mentioned as having been founding families. We then have the original 5 Elders families and the Figlin family, giving us a total of 9, and in the God Valley flashback, we learned of the Manmeyer family bringing us to 10, and the Remo Shifu family puts us at 11. There are other celestial dragons such as Charlos who have families, or Pluming who have been mentioned, but no specific family name has been associated with them just yet. This is also a good time to bring up once again that Gunko seems to be the odd one out, with neither a saint or world noble title nor a family name. Not only that, but her given name is fairly far removed from the other Holy Knights who all have Western or European inspired names, such as Shamrock or Killingham, while her name is kanji that literally translates to Army Child. Perhaps she really is an outsider who was given the rank of Holy Knight or even Celestial Dragon without necessarily being given any of the formal titles. Now, going back a bit, Sommers asked the other person on the transponder snail about the current situation with the food shortage, and as you'll recall, the Revolutionary Army has been attacking the Celestial Dragon's food shipments for a while now, having declared war ever since the Reverie over a month ago. Since then, we've seen the resulting chaos and the pressure felt by the citizens of the Holy Land on a few occasions, and it seems in this chapter that Shamrock has been requested to return to assist in some capacity. What this means is currently unknown, but I have to wonder if it'll be to help out against the Revolutionary Army's actions. After all, Dragon did mention that the real fight would begin when the Holy Knights were mobilized against them. This could also be seen as another piece of evidence to suggest that the Holy Knights do not necessarily live in Mary Joie. Shamrock has not been there since he started the Reverie, as he supposedly was there in front of the Elders days before the Revolutionaries attacked. None of the Holy Knights intervened with that, nor did Garling do anything except punish Milsgard afterwards, and now we see that Sommers and Killingham were seemingly in different places when they got summoned, with Sommers having been in his own house, wherever that is. That said, let's actually talk about the mechanics of this summoning ability. This chapter features the first time that we get to see someone create the summoning circle, referred to as the Abyss, up close. Back during the Egghead arc, Saturn made use of these once to summon himself onto the island and another time to bring the Elders, but we never really got to see him bring forth the circle like we do here with Gunko. As it seems, all she needs to do is put out her left arm with fingers extended and then grip them slightly. Of note, when she does this, her sleeve unravels a bit, and it's not clear to me if this means her devil fruit power is inherently linked to the summoning ability, or if this is just a way for her to unobstruct her hand for the summoning, since she does have extended sleeves on her jacket. It's also still not clear to me if just anyone can make the summoning. In this scene, Gunko takes the initiative to spawn the circle and Shamrock affirms, which doesn't necessarily mean it's something specific to her. However, we do learn that it's not just anybody that can travel through the Abyss pentagrams, being limited to only those who have the mark. While it's still kind of vague what this means, I have to wonder if the specific tattoo that we saw on Sommers' left arm is what's being referenced here. Most of the design is obscured, but you can make out a circle surrounded by 3 points, and I would assume the 2 other points that would form a star or a pentagram are below. It could be that all the Holy Knights and even the 5 Elders have this mark on their arms, perhaps even specifically their left arms, as that was also the arm that Gunko used to initiate the summoning. As a quick aside, I should note that it was also the left arm that Shanks gave up to save Luffy in Chapter 1. Could it be that he was branded with this mark when he revisited Mary Joie and did not mind losing his arm to get rid of it? We can at least tell that he didn't have this since birth, since we saw his left arm in full during Buggy's flashback, so perhaps this could indicate that he would have received it after the Roger Pyres disbanded, though of course, this is all just fun speculation. I wonder what other limitations exist for the Abyss, as even though the mark is required for people, it seems personal belongings can be transported as well, such as clothing, weapons, and even furniture as seen with Sommers. Killingham expresses some annoyance at the fact that they'll have to take the giant children back to Mary Joie by ship, which makes me wonder if they'll have to steal a giant ship to do so, or if they'll be requesting help from the world government for that. We know the Marines have some giants among their forces, so they definitely have ships large enough for them, and who knows, maybe this would provide an interesting opportunity for us to see some of the former Elbaf giants who were incorporated into the Marines, such as John Giant, come back into the story. Now, speaking of giants, Sommers asks what Shamrock was doing in an unaffiliated nation like Elbaf to begin with, and wonders if he was visiting Harald's grave. This suggests that the Holy Knights are indeed aware of Harald's circumstances and have some reason enough to potentially want to pay respects at his resting place. For a while now, we've talked about how Harald may have been a world government asset in some capacity, having potentially been influenced by Mother Carmel with her values of trade and diplomacy over plunder and war, and this line seems to further support the idea that Harald was a meaningful individual to the world government. This is made even more interesting when you realize that the difference between the Abyss pentagram that we see in this chapter and the one we saw in the throne room is their size. Here, the circle is just large enough for the two of the Holy Knights to come through. Meanwhile, the one in the throne room is large enough for a giant. This could mean that the circle was either prepared for or by a giant, perhaps so Harald could travel to and from Marie-Joie in secret. After all, they did not let anyone enter the castle after Harald's death, and even commoners were not allowed in, even while he was alive. So there must have been something secret going on in the castle. The chapter comes to an end as Shamrock suggests that they could make a game out of this by using their powers. It's not clear what exactly he has in mind, but perhaps we could see a smaller version of the native hunting competition that we saw in God Valley. Whatever happens, this just goes to show that the cruel, sadistic tendencies that run throughout the Celestial Dragons are still there among the Holy Knights. This was a fantastic chapter with so many implications and new mysteries. I'd love to hear what you all think about it down in the comments. No break week next week, so if you have any predictions for what's about to happen next, please do let us all know. As always, thank you so much for watching, stay safe, and I hope to see you in the next one.